you have a copy of the scriptures, or you want to just look it up on your computer or your phone, whatever the case may be, let's just spend a few minutes in James chapter 5, verses 7 to 12. I want you to tell me, when you look at this passage, what are some of the big words that are being found there? Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. May God add his blessing to the reading of his holy word. I'm glad, again, that you are here with us. So, growing up, I always remembered people jokingly saying, don't pray for patience, because God's going to bring things along to test your patience. And it was as if we were talking about it like that was a bad thing. And whenever people would say that, they would either smile or they'd give you a look like, you know better. I just want to say that I really regret that not only make an impression on me, but I also use that in an effort to get a laugh. I like making people laugh. I like to joke around. But what was I doing? I was using something as a punchline that God told me that was to be a part of my life. It's always a good thing when God works something that's intended to be a part of the fruit of the Spirit, intended to be a part of who we are as Christians. When God ends up working things in our life to test our life, to show us ways that we should be patient. I mean, that's always a good thing. So I hope that from now on, that particular joke and that particular, that particular punchline, I guess, would be just excised from our vocabulary. God is calling us to patience, and he loves us enough to develop that patience within us. And many times we have that patience developed in us when hard times hit. And we are seeing it again with this COVID season. How is our patience? Well, judging from how we're talking to each other online or even family discussions and such, it seems like that there's a lot of division that's going on. I mean, there's just an issue of having a problem with authority, having a problem with someone else telling us what we should do, what we shouldn't do. And that's been something that there's nothing new about that under the sun. That's happened ever since the start of the dawn of time. And when as soon as man came along on the earth, God was telling us to do something. Someone comes along, Satan comes along and tells us, no, he's really not after your good, do this. And then that's how we ended up getting into our brokenness that's happening in the world. We've got to be very, very careful. So how many times is the word patience or the word form of patience used? Well, he tells us in verses 7 and 8, be patient. Be patient. And even as he's talking about the farmer, which we'll get into in a moment, but it's really a self-evident type of illustration. There's this understanding of patience, and he's asking us to be patient because the Lord is coming. The Lord will return one day. We have to recognize that. And so as we understand that, be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. Be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. And this is something that we as pastors need to constantly remind all of you. We need to remind ourselves that the way things are right now are not the way things will always be. There will be a time when the Lord will come. And in fact, when he's talking about coming, he's talking about the judge is now standing at the door. Now, when was this written? Well, this was written in the middle of the first century. This has been in the middle of the first century, 19 millennia ago. And if that was the case then, what's the case now? How much closer is he now to coming through that door and to one day make all things right? That's what we have to be patient about, is that one day when Christ does come back, all things will be made right. Until then, there will be times when sin is crouching at the door, looking to master you, as talking about to Cain. When Cain killed Abel, the Lord warned him in Genesis 4:7 that sin is crouching at the door and it looks to master you, but you must resist. That's what we have to be careful of. So as we continue to look at this, we come along and we see some of the examples of patience. And while we don't have much of an agricultural culture in the cities that we're living in right now, many of us grew up on a farm, and I remember that. Even though I prefer concrete, I prefer places where I can go get groceries very, very closely. There was one time, part of my life, where I was on a farm, and you plant things, and things wouldn't pop up immediately like we expected to do. I mean, like on our phone, if we have to wait 5 seconds for something to pop up on our phone, we're calling IT, or we're calling Verizon, we're calling all of these different things. But the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth. See, when you wait for something that you're intended to wait, it's a precious thing to be able to wait and to be able to come alongside and be ready to receive what God has for you. But in both the early and the late rains, these are expressions that are used all through the Old Testament. The early rains, the late rains. There's times when you're going to have to wait for the rain to come. There's times when the rains come early, but even then, it's going to take time for those crops to pop up. We also see later on, as we talked about, the example of suffering and patience in verse 10. Take the prophets. Now, time doesn't allow us to go through all that the prophets talked about. But when you read in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 11, and 12, where it's talking about that that you're going to be blessed when people mock you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you in the name of Christ, rejoice and be glad. Why? Because the prophets suffered the same way that you are. It is a part of being a follower of Jesus to find ourselves in persecution. And we better understand that it's what persecution is. It's when we are doing something for the name of Christ, not something for the name of our political party, or not something from the name of any kind of liberty that we may see here in this life and such. It is doing something for the cause and for the name of Christ. We will be persecuted because the world is screaming away from his design and screaming against all the design that Christ laid out in his word. And then you also see, then you also see Job. You've heard of the steadfastness of Job. Now, I was sitting in an Old Testament class one time in college, and one of the things that was said was, well, Job really wasn't that patient, was he? Because he spent a lot of time asking God, what are you doing? And he was listening to his friends try to pontificate and try to get into the mind of God about what was going on. And Job, if you just repent of your sin, then you'll get rescued out of that. But the problem is that just because Job was asking a question doesn't mean that he was being impatient. He remained steadfast. If you remember in Job 1 and 2, that his wife told him to curse God and die, and he refused to do that. He remained steadfast. And when the Lord showed up, he actually quit talking and listened to the Lord. But in the meantime, God gives us permission to ask questions about what's happening. And I know many of us are doing that right now. We're just wondering, God, what in the world are you up to? All of this, though, as we engage in the patience, we begin to see a little bit about the character and the work of God. You go to verse 11, but we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. And he talks about, you've heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord. And now the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Patience, being steadfast, recognizing that we need to be moving along with God in his timing. In fact, I love what Dave Howitt would always say, is that we need to be sure that we're going at the speed of God. Not too fast and getting out ahead of him, and not too slow. We need to be going at the speed of God. And when we are patient in the midst of all of these trials, it is then that we begin to see the work and the compassion and the mercy of God in the midst of it all. Especially when we know that Christ is going to come and rescue us. We didn't deserve that, but out of his compassion, he sent his son to rescue us from our sin. He sent his son to take care of the very thing that he hated in us and put that upon himself, sin. But he loved us enough not to leave us alone, but that's where we continue to be discipled. You see, that's why if we're not in the Word and things like this happen, then all of a sudden impatience rises up because we don't have the Word to inform us about what's really going on. Nothing about what's going on in this life right now should surprise us. God has given us lots of information to help us know how to navigate through this. And that's why it's so important for us to be in the Word in some way every single day. There was a survey that was done recently that only 9% of people have read their Bible every day. Only 9%. There's a lot that read it every other day, but every single day we need to make this just as much a part of our routine as it would be Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy or a baseball game or drinking a cup of coffee or eating a meal. It needs to be that important to us in getting there. And so when we are patient, that's where I believe verse 12 comes in. But above all, my brothers, do not swear, because in your impatience you begin to say, God, what are you up to? Oh, what are you up to? Above all, my brothers, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath. But when you say yes, our character has to be such in the patience and as part of the fruit of the Spirit that when we say yes, we don't need to say yes on a stack of Bibles. Our character is such as that when someone hears yes out of us, it's yes. Just like when God makes a promise, we know it's yes. 2 Corinthians 1:20. And when you say no, you're not going to waffle. It's no. That you may not fall under condemnation. Our words matter, and we have to be sure that in the midst of our impatience, that we are not moving in a way that is pulling people back and pulling people away from the witness of the Church of Jesus Christ here in this world. I was telling someone today that I believe that Christianity and Christians have an opportunity to shine. I mean, true biblical Christianity has an opportunity to shine. We can show people what it really means to follow God's design and way and purpose. We can show people what it really means to love your neighbor as yourself. We can show people what it really means to be the hands and feet of Christ in this world. But we've got to do it. And that means that we are out and engaging people and talking to people out of the joy of what God has done in us and through us. Pardon me. A lot of talking today, but I do hope that you can still see me. We're at the end of the study, but it's talking about how it's having a problem playing this video. So I guess what I'm going to do right now, I'm gonna shut things down. You can let me know if you've heard all of this, but I pray that you're looking at your prayer guide, and I pray that you're taking time to pray for our churches as we continue to try to figure out ways to navigate through all of this that God has for us. For those of you that are part of Arapahoe Road, we're going to let you know what the next few days, next few Wednesdays are going to look like. But I do believe it's going to be important for us in August to be able to have an emphasis on prayer and be able to have an emphasis moving forward in making sure that we're seeking God and not seeking ourselves and believing that it's God. We need to seek after God through His Son, by the Spirit, in His Word, and that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. Hey, Gail, I appreciate that. I can't see myself, but actually that's a bonus, isn't it? I got a great radio face. I'm just kidding. Just something to say. But I'm glad, Gail, that you're able to give me some encouragement that it's still able to be seen. But I'm going to peel off now. We've been on for about 21, 22 minutes. And I just pray that you're praying for our church, praying for our community that desperately needs to know Christ, our communities, and that you're praying for our country and for the corners of creation, that we would make much of Jesus as we be, make, multiply, and send, hopeful, joyful disciples of Jesus. Great days are ahead. I'm encouraged, even in the midst of all this, because God's still on his throne and Jesus is still commissioning his people. So let's move and go forward and trust that God is going to use us in a mighty way. Thanks, everybody. Good seeing you, and see you next time. Bye-bye.